go through the detailed bios because of time, but we're going to share it with the recordings. So the next two is the two registered architects, Hugo and Jason Oberholster, who's really going to show us how the building environment can make a difference in informal settlements.
Jason and I decided that we'll do a collaborative presentation just because it's difficult to do collaboration. So we wanted to even change every slide, so it's really difficult for you to follow, but we thought a bit about it. And yeah, so I'll start and then Jason will conclude. I think to give you some context, I teach at the architecture department and mostly in the postgraduate course, and my focus is on sustainability and specifically climate adaptation. Jason is our colleague. He's a PhD student who started, is it this year or last year already? But he's actually been involved in a number of informal settlements, and the one that he's working in for a number of years as a practicing architect. So he's actually now taking it further into academia and thinking about how this process really works. Showing you what we've done, but I think really important for us to talk about how do we engage, how do we translate the work that we're doing as architects into tangible outcomes that could really lead to improved well-being for the inhabitants of the community. And I think that's really important for us because most of our work manifests in the built environment, but it's also something that's quite difficult to really implement in the end. So yeah. To contextualize it, I think we need to also state our approach or the way we see informal settlements, really. I think for many, informal settlements are seen as a transitionary phase where we will move into a formal context, so we will one day develop our cities into being formalized altogether. But I think that's in many ways quite conflicting in terms of what we see currently. We are very much aware of the high levels of informality. And ironically, this whole notion of the modern city, which is highly regulated and controlled and organized, both drives this informality, but then at the same time ignores it and says, well, by the way, you're not part of the formal process. We will not deal with this at all. And I think it could be it reminds us often the fact that we are going to sit with this condition for a number of years and possibly forever, which means as professionals in the built environment, we need to start thinking about how do we actually engage with this and how do we actually work within these communities. So at the Department of Architecture, but under the Unit for Urban Citizenship, we've actually been working in Melusi, Cemetery View, and Plastic View, and we'll be sharing some of our work here. And I will start with the work in Melusi. I think we all know where they are. It's in the Pretoria West. It's a rather new community. And we've had 2 studios in there already. It's the Climate Change Adaptation Studio from 2020, and then the Placemaking and Placekeeping Studio this year. And I think to contextualize that, we've got a larger research project that looks at the interaction between the built environment and the users as a means of understanding the interaction between public health and the built environment. And that's not necessarily new, but working in informal settlements is, I think, really important because for a long time that's really been ignored. And in order for us to do that work, we're collaborating with the Department of Public Health and Chemical Engineering for us to understand both the built environment, but also in ways to monitor certain indicators in the process. And for the project, we are focusing specifically on heat stress and water insecurity. And from that, hope to develop a community resilience plan. So the thinking is that we will understand ultimately the exogenic and endogenic vulnerabilities of the users within Melusi, and importantly, the ground level conditions that they're experiencing. So it's a complex set of terms and graphics that my colleagues at Public Health developed, but ultimately we are looking at a number of factors and bringing it all together to give us an holistic understanding. And the aim is to get us as good an understanding then, but importantly, an empirical understanding of it. And I think that's what, so working in situ, in Malusia itself is really important. Now, what I'll be sharing with you the work that we've done as the architecture department, which really is very much spatial in the way that we monitor it. In the first phase that we undertook in 2020, we looked at the vulnerabilities in Malusia, and we started translating that from what is available for South Africa and for Tshwane. So there's a lot of information available on the larger vulnerabilities, but what does it really mean when you're moving into a community itself? So we translated that into specific exposures that we are dealing with, and ultimately we've come to realize, I think we all know that, and we repeated it again, that informal settlements are very different. So again, when you start looking at a comparison between Malusia and Plastic View and Cemetery View, for instance, we start seeing that the conditions are different, and resultantly the exposures and vulnerabilities should also be different in the end. So, for instance, Malusia has a much lower density, which I think translates into a very different quality of life in the end. So, for the work, we started looking at the range of exposures, the range of sensitivities, and larger hazards, and identified infrastructure deficit, exposure to water insecurity, higher temperatures, and ultimately extreme weather events as being important factors to consider. But we didn't want to stop there. We wanted to translate it back into what it means in the built environment. So how does that translate into the typical house that you see in the end, and ultimately bringing that to the point where we say, what does it mean for the users? Now, what you see here is a number of images that we started developing. And because we couldn't get access to the informal settlements in 2020 because of the lockdown, we used a process called cognitive dissociation, where we started asking the students to imagine what would it be if you're exposed to these different risks and hazards. So identifying users, creating a story, and ultimately also looking for ways that you can create solutions that would actually be local and contextual within the context. So looking at a way to really understand the user in the end. In 2021, this year, we've been able to go to the site, which was actually really nice. So we used the Okaduba method that's been developed by UP and Chalmers University as a means for us to start documenting small-scale GIS-based data, but also spaces that are generally not documented. And I think informal settlements are really one of those. So we started with OpenStreetMaps, using it as an open source platform where you can start documenting the informal settlement itself. So that's, I think, a good start already. And there, the geography department helped us a lot with a lot of the documentation. But we didn't stop there. We moved on towards what happens in situ on ground level. So using geotagging, and as Marion noted, all the different resources that we've been able to document on site, the different important resource nodes, houses that have resources or not, waste that's accumulated in certain areas, and ultimately important services to the community and important businesses and so forth. Now, the intention was here to start understanding the context itself and also understand the shared spaces in the process. Now, because we're architects, we don't like to stop there. I think that's really important, is looking for ways that we can start talking about the spatiality, the nature of the public space that is shared by the community. And I think this is important in informal settlements because that's often not really available for anybody, which really is, and where I think you can make a massive impact in the end. So translating that to the lived experiences in the end and where that is located in the process. From there, we've started developing solutions. identifying the infrastructure needs that's needed. And I think this is really often a response to the nature of the infrastructure upgrades that we often see, and arguing that there are ways that we can actually improve the well-being in the process. So identifying that it can be linked with the larger network of the community, and how the ways of service provision can ultimately also provide public goods in a sense. So it can provide public space where we can engage, space where we can also, we would like to spend time. And so rather seeing it as a trajectory towards a slow incremental growth of the informal settlement. And that has really translated into a number of proposals by the students, and which addresses both the specifics of points within the site, but also starting to talk about how do we change streets as a whole. Can we do that? How do we do that? And I think this is really our question ultimately, is how do we translate these ideas into tangible outcomes in the process? I think there's a lot of ideas around what it can mean for the community, but how do we actually make it tangible? For the project itself, though, so the larger research project started by simply understanding the context that we're working in, but now we're at the point where we'd like to understand the endogenic and exogenic risks that people are now exposed to, which meant that we started the middle of this year with collecting a number of water samples, developing sensors where we can start documenting the indoor environment, temperature, pollution, light qualities, and so forth. And this meant that we observed a series of selected houses, but also developed infrastructure. That's my colleague Paul, who's developed a number of sensors that we can actually install in informal settlements or in houses without electricity, which is quite tricky. But in the process, the students have been part of developing the sensors, installing the sensors, and documenting the information. So I think this is a great opportunity for them to also work within informal settlements, and working from it both as architects working with space, but also as from an academic scientific point of view, understanding the empirical data that we're collecting in the process. And so this is where we're at, and hopefully we'll over the next 2 years be able to collect enough sufficient data for the work that will continue from there.
There we go. Thank you, Jan. We're moving on to Plastic View and Cemetery View. Plastic View, formerly known as Woodlane Village. It's in Pretoria East, for those who do not know. And the project, we've been in the Unit for Urban Citizenship, has been involved there since 2016. And in 2020, we reframed the project as the Moraletta Park Integration Project. So the focus is to facilitate collaboration between all stakeholders. We work with community members, community leadership, local NGOs, local public-private partnerships, and with local government to really start with a pre-feasibility study where we can assist City of Tshwane to really prepare for the upgrading of informal settlements, the program which is called the UISP. Then in phase 1 of this project, we also use the Ukudoba methodology, same as the Mulisi studio, where we went to map the settlement through various different mapping sets. So if we look onto phase 1, we looked at the macro and meso mapping, where we look at demographics, population density, economic density, transport nodes, spatial planning. I would have loved to show everything to you guys, but obviously these are big maps with big data on them. So really to look at the regional spatial development frameworks, also to put us in a position to understand how we can assist local government within the upgrade of these informal settlements. So as you would see here, one of the data sets that we have collected is the history of Plastic View. We did the same with Cemetery View, really to see how the settlements have grown, densified, and the changes. So there you'll see from 2008 to 2021, where we can really see the changes that happened. So just to give some context, in 2008 to 2009, you'll see a big difference. Before that, the settlement was spread out, and then became the lawsuits between City of Tshwane and Lawyers for Human Rights, and Plastic View or Woodlane Village was formed and in the structure that you see from 2009. So you can clearly see how plastic view as densified. Now, this links to what Marion said, is the data that they can truly use to see the changes, the growth in the settlements. And you guys will probably recall this from the previous presentation as well. And it's really great to see that this data gets used. So we were able to put this data in place to see how many units there are. Plastic View, 922 units with a population of 8,000 to 9,000 people. And we can break it down to 341 single-family homes, 489 multi-family homes, which is a big thing. And there's up to 12 people per home. And then 92 enterprise units, which can be broken down into various enterprises. So looking into the feeling of the community and really going into the mapping, also using the Ukadoba methodology to map each and every one of these on geolocate them. We look at various aspects like water supply, spaza shops, social lounges, hairdressers, chicken farms, scrapyards, coffee shops. There's coffee shops even. I had the nicest coffee in there. There you go. So really to understand what the community is about. And then taking it further, I know this looks like a very complex image and you probably can't read it, but what I want to show is that then we look further to healthcare and service provisions, trying to understand what services are there in the community, where should they go to provide, to get healthcare services, various services. Luckily enough, COPC has the clinics over there, but there's more needed than just that. So we're trying to build those structures and understanding that. Then one of the most important things are to really start understanding the community itself, to really understand the social networks. That's something that came out in the previous presentation as well. And to understand the leadership structure. Plastic View has a very strong leadership structure. And some of the Cemetery View leaders are also here, and which are also community health workers. And really starting to understand how these structures work, how the settlement operates, their daily routines, daily lives. So if we take that further, you probably won't be able to read any of the text there, but just to start understanding that we pull out the stories from community members, what their backgrounds are, what their skills are, what their ambitions are, really starting to understand what these settlements are about, so that we can really start leveraging that potential that is there. Because there's real potential within these communities and within the people. And then taking that further and translating that into social potential, where we can truly use these skills that are there, or the community structures that are there, the social structures, to really start improving these settlements and helping them to improve themselves. Phase 2 of our project is community action planning, which we call CAP, where we truly go into the community. There you'll see some of the students working with the community, truly finding out what their problems are, what their issues are, what they want, what their ambitions are, so we can understand. So we don't put down a toilet, but that is not what they want. Or they want a toilet, but we don't provide that to them. So truly understanding the needs of the community so that we can supply towards that, or work with the stakeholders to get this sorted. So through these community action planning processes, we were able to work with COPC, Dr. Eleanor May and them, and really provide for some of these things through those structures. So we don't provide them ourselves, but we connect and try and assist in that way. Something that was really interesting to do this year and very fun is the honors group and the masters group worked very well together in a live build process. So we built on the 2020 community action plans, and we took that further into a live build process where we tried to work with the community, design with them, and see how they build their structures and how they put that together. And they actually put up a structure they're trying to test building methods. Then phase 4 of the project is co-designing. So co-designing is a very important process in the studio to really work with the stakeholders to start conceptualizing what the community's can truly be through social engagement and expanding beyond the expert towards one of collaborator and facilitator, where we as architects and architect students truly play the role of facilitator, working with various stakeholders, community members, and truly just designing what they envision in these spaces. So this is a project by Ms. Smuts, where she worked with the community to really see what they lack and need: a safe house, open libraries, congregation spaces. The next project is from Ms. Hayes, where she worked with the community to try and connect the church, the community to the church and vice versa, to see how we can provide for multiple solutions to their problems and start envisioning a settlement upgrade that truly caters to their needs. The next project is from Ms. van Lochenberg, where she truly investigated the SANS regulations, SANS 10400, the building regulations, to see how we can actually work in these settlements and work towards an upgrade within the bylaws, within the requirements, and working with temporary versus non-temporary structures. We do have a very interesting situation with Plastic View, where there are court orders against it. So how can we truly invest in these settlements, even though there might be court orders going on, so that we can really truly leverage these informal settlements and get them to an upgrade space? Which brings us to the in situ upgrade of these informal settlements. So the upgrading of informal settlements, like I said, is framed within the UISP, and the UISP strongly requires in situ upgrading of these informal settlements, and only as a last resort does it state that relocation is okay, as a last resort. And we are often of opinion that architecture is uniquely positioned to assist within the in situ upgrading of informal settlements and facilitate processes of community engagement and participation. The late Mr. Patrick Hunsley said, "The kind of upgrade we speak of is not about land and services alone. This is about realizing real citizenship and equality in our cities." We also look at the Laufen Manifesto for Humane Design Culture. We must produce spaces that counter exploitation, control and alienation, whether in urban or rural landscapes. With all our expertise, creativity, and power, we need to contribute more dynamically and consequentially to the global quest for equality. Just to not have a back and forth here, I'm going to quickly just talk a little bit about a slide from Jan. So in addition to these arguments that I've just made, we also have a duty to include these informal settlements within the climate change adaptation spectrum, as these places do not only present significant vulnerabilities to the impacts of climate change, but they also show a high level of adaptive capacity. As argued by Zirgvogel, including informal settlements and promoting adaptive capacity and agency are important factors to developing local climate-responsive urbanism. In our work in the local informal settlements, we have seen both high levels of local adaptation, individual placemaking, technology development, but also the ability of informal processes and informal development to be compatible. This brings us to the contribution from our side to interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches. Through our engagement with these various informal settlements, the participation, we can truly start leveraging our skills within climate adaptation, social justice, social empowerment, community empowerment, and truly work together and collaborate with transdisciplinary skills and really realize communities that assist towards the sustainable livelihoods of communities and community members. Through the building of strong networks of engagement with communities and various stakeholders, the opportunity exists for various disciplines to interact and participate in co-research and co-design, which we're trying to already do with COPC, and we're trying to continue that, and we are open to further collaboration with more departments, more disciplines. So this brings us to the question, how can we collaborate? How do we collaborate and leverage our capacity and skills to achieve real improvements in these communities towards reaching the Sustainable Development Goals? So I'm going to leave it off with, how can we collaborate? There we go. Thank you so much.